Hi everyone! I have filmed this video so many times and hated it every time, so we're gonna try again. I am going over my 2020 reading year. This is my, I don't even know what I'm gonna call it. Reading Year in Review 2020 edition? Something like that? I'm not sure. But I will talk about what my reading goals were, go through all the books that I read, and I will mention my favorites, but I'm going to talk about those in a separate video. So I'll go into what these books are about and my thoughts on them, give you like my rating and stuff. I also have a notebook here that I'll be picking up occasionally to look at all the information. I also read a lot of audiobooks. I listened to a lot of audiobooks, so I have like the narrators and stuff listed on in the notebook. So if I'm like looking down a lot, it's probably because I'm looking at what I have written. And I think that's like all I need to mention. So yeah, I'm gonna get into it. So my goals for 2020 was really just to like try to make reading a hobby again and do better than 2019. And initially I had my number goal set at like 30 or 36. I can't remember which one. But I ended up increasing it to 52. And I didn't make it to 52, but it was really interesting seeing where I was and watching that tracking. So that's one of the reasons why my number goal for this year is also 52. And also I use Goodreads, so that's like when I'm talking about rating and like seeing my tracking and stuff like that, the context of that is from using Goodreads. So I ended up reading 30 books, and I guess I do have this piece of paper here of a bunch of titles that I thought about reading that I wasn't like super strict on, but I did end up reading 5 of these. And I also have Anna Karenina at the bottom that I like really wanted to reread, but I like knew I didn't have the time for. I wrote it down anyway, but like more realistically, I was definitely thinking about the first 7, and I read 5 of them. So that's still pretty good, even though this was just something I decided to like list them out for fun, I guess. I didn't want to forget that those were the books that I was thinking about in the beginning of the year, and I read 5 of them, so that's pretty good. And that was kind of it. That wasn't even necessarily a goal, but I have it written down, so I thought I would show you. So then I'm gonna move to the side a little bit because then I can put like the pictures of the audiobooks and stuff, that the things that I don't have physically. I literally only have 11 books, but I read 30. So that's a lot of audiobooks. Which is good though, because that, there's this weird resurgence of people saying that audiobooks are not reading, like again on BookTube. Like people that are leaving comments on booktubers videos being like, but audiobooks aren't real reading, and it's really annoying. I mean, I haven't been getting comments like that, but I can't believe there are still people that think audiobooks are not reading. Okay. So, yes, I will put images of the books here that I don't have. So, first, we have Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. This I listened to an audiobook, and it was more of like a production than a strict like reading of the novella. And this included a full cast, which includes Phoebe Fox, Rose Leslie, David Tennant, David Horovitch, James Wilby, Susan Wooldridge, and Hannah Genesius, I think. So it was like more of a production, more of something that they like made more dialogue for it and made more narration. I didn't read it physically along with listening to the audiobook because it was made into this production, but I do have the book in the Criterion edition of Vampire, so that's how I had read it before. So did I mention that this is a reread? There's probably going to be a lot of like deja vu moments for me just because I like literally just filmed this and I'm trying again. So I do have to apologize if it seems like I'm a little all over the place, which is pretty usual for me, but it might come out even more in this video. Yeah, it was a reread, and I mostly just wanted to re-experience the story because I had forgotten a lot of the details, which now I should tell you what Carmilla is about. I'm still gonna be kind of vague. For the most part, I don't think I'm gonna go into spoilers at all for any of the books, but if I do, I will mention it and probably put something on the screen to show when spoilers are happening. That way you can either skip or mute for a while. So Carmilla starts off with this carriage accident happening outside a castle, and Carmilla is one of the passengers, and she needs time to recover before continuing on her journey. But her mother, who she was with, is in a rush, and there's like an emergency that she has to attend to. And so Carmilla stays with Laura and her father, they live at that castle, and Laura and Carmilla become friends while Carmilla is in recovery, and then is fine afterwards. Their friendship kind of develops into something more, but then also they have to be careful because there are girls in the village, in the town, that are being killed by a mysterious illness. So I'll leave it at that. And it was really enjoyable to listen to the story and just like remember the details again and listen to this sort of other production of it. I guess it's sort of like a radio show. It's like, in a way, it's an adaptation of the story because of the way that they have this full cast and sound effects and music and stuff, and I like having that like full atmosphere. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, if I didn't mention that yet. And then next I have another audiobook, and that is The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. This was narrated by Simon Vance, and initially I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and then I rated it up to a 5 out of 5. So this book, and I might as well mention it now, The Queen of the Damned, also by Anne Rice, are the second and third books in the Vampire Chronicles, and these were favorites of mine. They were so good, so I'll talk about them more in my favorites video. And I guess I'll just say here that, I don't know, I'm just really enjoying the series. I'm kind of a sucker for it, honestly. Like, I initially had rated The Vampire Lestat a 4 out of 5, and I think that was because I was kind of almost like bitter that like Louis wasn't the main character, and then it wasn't from his perspective, because he's the main character in Interview with the Vampire, which is the first book, and he wasn't as much in this one, and I kind of like, Lestat's kind of made out to be a bad guy, in a way, in Interview, so I wasn't super happy with it completely focusing on him, even though I was interested in his backstory and everything. And then once the story, like, concludes, there's definitely, like, one arc that goes throughout, like one large arc, I guess, that is told throughout Interview with the Vampire Lestat, and The Queen of the Damned. And so then once I finished The Queen of the Damned, I was like, screw it, you know what? The Vampire Lestat, that's being rated up. So I changed it to 5 out of 5, but I didn't fully, like, appreciate that book or Lestat until I also read Queen of the Damned. So that explains the changing my rating. As well as I will mention that Simon Vance, who's the narrator of the audiobooks, does a really good job. There are a lot of characters, and just like subsequent books keep adding more, and he does a really good job at having distinct voices as much as he can for all the characters, because there's a lot and there's no way that he can really make them all distinct, yet he still does a really good job at not being confusing with them, because he changes his voice a little, but then he also does like certain accents for certain characters depending on where they're from. And yeah, I really have to hand it to him, because I would be like so confused. And I'm pretty sure he narrates like most of the series, if not all the books in the series, or as many that have been made into audiobooks. I'm assuming all of them have, but I don't actually know for sure. Yeah, but I'll talk about the Vampire Chronicles more in my favorites video. And then the next book I read was The Sentence's Death by Anthony Horowitz, which is the first book in a series, just his Detective Hawthorne series. And this was narrated by Rory Kinnear, who I mostly know from Penny Dreadful. He plays Frankenstein's monster. And I gave this a 5 out of 5, but I feel like I should rate it down because I don't actually remember a lot. So maybe a 4 out of 5 in hindsight, just now that time has passed. And this is the second book in... Did I say it was the first book? It's the second book in a series. The first one is called The Word is Murder. And it's sort of meta because Anthony Horowitz is the author, but he's also like the main character. And he knows this Detective Hawthorne, who is sort of like a consultant that he goes to for writing scripts for crime shows on TV, and then like maybe other information for novels that he writes. And then Detective Hawthorne in the first book like approaches him and asks him to write a book about him. So he's like, I can't do that. And then so it evolves into him writing this mystery series that has to do with cases that Anthony ends up going on along with Detective Hawthorne. The series is like murder mysteries, but also you can tell there's going to be like this overarching plot line that is more about Anthony Horowitz, the character, and the character of Detective Hawthorne. I don't know if I like the first or second one better, but I do like that the second one included more information about Detective Hawthorne and sort of hinted at like something else going on, and maybe something that Anthony will kind of look into himself secretly without like Detective Hawthorne's permission. But honestly, I don't remember a lot about the specific mystery in this one. I know that an author is murdered, and that's it. I like the sort of development of getting to know Anthony and Detective Hawthorne. I can't remember his first name. I think it's Daniel, but I'm not 100% sure. Yes, the sentence is death. Ooh, okay, so then I have a whole series, but I will mostly be talking about this series in my favorites video because I listened to the audiobook for the entire series, and the audiobook specifically is my favorite, but I also like have it broken down into the volumes as well. So this is why I ended up increasing my goal on Goodreads from like 30 or 36 books, whatever it was before, to 52, because I read the Locke Key series by Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez, who is the illustrator, because this is a graphic series. I gave the audiobook a 5 out of 5 stars, but I also wanted to, like, as I was going through the series, I wanted to log the volumes individually, but then I also wanted to make a separate review for the audiobook. So with it being 6 volumes, and then also me reviewing and like logging the audiobook, that was like 7 books that I added to the already 3 books read, meaning I had read 10 books by the end of January, early February, and I was like 8 books ahead of schedule. And I was like, you know what? Let's try to keep going. Let's aim higher. And I was ambitious and changed my goal to 52 books. So that's why that ended up happening. I'll just go through my ratings real quickly. The audiobook, I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Did I just say that? I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and it's part of the full cast. I didn't have enough room to write all the names down, but part of the main cast includes Haley Joel Osment, Tatiana Maslany, Kate Mulgrew, and even Stephen King, who is Joe Hill's father. Stephen King, Joe Hill, are father and son. Something that I forgot to mention is that every audiobook that I listen to on Audible, because that's what my dad has an Audible account, and basically I've taken over his account. Because he used to let credits to and then I started using them, and now I just use his credits all the time. Most all the audiobooks I listen to on Audible, however, so some of them are like Audible exclusive or like Audible originals. However, there were a handful that I listened to just on YouTube, and I'll hopefully remember to be specific about those ones and link those videos in the description so that you can listen to them too if you're interested. I do know the Locke Key, I think, is specific to Audible, and it's the whole series, but it's so good. Really, obviously I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and we'll talk about it more in my favorites video, but I will also just mention that I gave all the volumes except for volume 4. A 5 out of 5, and volume 4 I gave a 4 out of 5. So yeah, it was just so enjoyable. I'll get into a little bit what it's about after I go through all the volumes. I'll just tell you the titles. So volume 1 is called Welcome to Lovecraft. Volume 2 is called Headgames. Volume 3 is called Crown of Shadows. Volume 4 is called Keys to the Kingdom. Volume 5 is called Clockworks. And volume 6 is called Alpha and Omega. All of those were 5 out of 5 except for Keys to the Kingdom, volume 4, which I gave a 4 out of 5, and I think just that one, probably had something in it that I was a little less interested in, or maybe it made me upset and I took it out on the rating. Locke Key briefly is about this family that moves into their father's childhood home where he grew up. Their father is killed in the beginning, and their mother went through sexual assault, so it's like a very traumatic event, and probably trigger warnings for this, especially because it is a graphic series. So comic series, I guess I should say. Comics, graphic series, I don't know, I usually say graphic series because, like, a graphic novel series that's an oxymoron. Like, you can't be a novel and a series. That doesn't make sense. So, comic series, I guess. But, yeah, it's very dark and gory, too. It has some gore to it. So, if you need to, like, look into trigger warnings more specifically, I'll maybe leave them in the description. If not, I will at least leave a couple websites where you can go to look up trigger warnings for, like, books and movies and stuff. I know one is called Does the Dog Die? Or Does the Dog Die? Something like that. But this family moves into their father's childhood home, and the 3 children keep hearing these, like, whispers, and the whispers lead them to keys that open up various, like, sort of secret doors and secret areas, like objects, I guess, of the house. And each door or object kind of does, like, a magical thing. So it's got, like, this fantasy element, but also it's like a horror series. It was just so good. It was really good, basically. And it's self-contained. Like, it was just the 6 volumes, and it's over. I'm pretty sure I think there were, like, a few other things on the website. Oh, did I mention this yet? I did. While I was listening to the audiobooks, I was looking at them physically online because I don't own them. So I'll link that website in the description. But there were other volumes, I'm pretty sure, that weren't part of the book, or, like, just, like, little comics, not, like, full volumes. And I don't know what those are specifically. So, oh my god, this is taking me forever. I've already been filming for 20 minutes, and I'm, like, 10 books in. I guess that's a third, but still. Okay, finally, the first physical book I have here is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. And this is just one that really... The experience of reading this just sucked, basically, because I pushed through it even though I probably shouldn't have. I probably should have put it down and not finished it and, like, saved it for another time. But I started it in, I think, 2018, and then I just, like, maybe read chapters here and there throughout 2019, which is my lowest, like, just not a reading year, okay? I've already mentioned it exactly 1 bajillion times, okay? So, yeah, my reading year was, like, non-existent in 2019, and so that was, like, a whole year that I was, like, maybe picking this up, but, like, only a little bit, like, only reading a little bit from it, and then, like, finally, 2020, I was like, I'm gonna freaking finish this book, and I did, but I think that it ended up becoming this sort of, like, accomplishment to just finish the book instead of really read it. I did like it. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, but I think the experience of, like, trying to read it while I, like, wasn't in the mood to read it, and having this sort of reading slump, or at least, like, reading slump mood while I was in the middle of it didn't help. I would like to read this again, like, much, like, years from now, and hopefully I will appreciate and enjoy it more. I do think that I will like it more because I like a lot of elements of this. This is a Victorian novel. It has to do with Walter Hartright, who, on his way to a new job, he teaches people how to paint, and he's an artist who helps people make art, basically. And on his way to this new client's house, he encounters a woman in white, and then he later finds out that she was an escaped patient at a mental asylum nearby. And there's sort of this mystery surrounding this woman, as well as this conflict that comes about because Walter falls in love with the woman that he's supposed to be teaching how to paint, Laura, but Laura is already engaged, and so, yeah, a conflict arises there. And then there's also Laura's half-sister, Miriam, and just, like, there's a cast of characters, and they all are very significant, and you get to know them, and I really like that sort of thing, where they all are important to the story and intertwine and things like that. So, yeah, and also it involves a mystery, although I do think one of the only things, I don't know how it will be, obviously, reading it in a normal way and not throughout a couple of years, but there were 2 characters that I felt were kind of similar, and I kept mixing up. So, hopefully, I keep meaning to watch adaptations of this, and hopefully it will, like, distinguish those two characters away from, like, blending into each other, so, yes. Then the next book I have is King Arthur, History and Legend by Dorsey Armstrong, which is an audiobook. I think it's only an audiobook. I don't know if there's actually anything physically that you can buy for this, but it's part of the Great Courses. So Dorsey Armstrong is a professor who teaches the course King Arthur, History and Legend, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. It was really good, but I feel like a lot of the information I don't really remember as much anymore, but it was really interesting to just learn about this historical / legendary figure and see how these different, like, stories have become part of his mythos and created this, like, legendary figure, and then also just, like, the way that we have included King Arthur in things in pop culture today. You know, one of my favorite shows is Merlin, so it's just, like, interesting kind of seeing that sort of thing, even though obviously Merlin focuses on Merlin and King Arthur a lot instead of it just sort of being, like, about King Arthur, but still, I love that show. I felt like rewatching it, but then I didn't, and instead ended up listening to this audiobook because I don't really, I mean, now I do know a bit about King Arthur, but I would still like to read a lot of the material that she goes over that is part of the sort of canon of the history and legend of King Arthur. And I know there's that new movie coming out soon. The Green Giant? I've already forgotten, but it has Dev Patel in it. I'm totally forgetting. I'll put the poster here. But it looks really good, and I'm excited for it. And I would like to read the book first, though, the story that it is based on, or at least loosely based on. And you could tell that Dorsey Armstrong is just, like, so passionate and, like, loves talking about King Arthur, just in the narration of the audiobook. So that was great too, because I love when you're listening to, like, nonfiction on audiobook and it's narrated by someone who is either, like, involved in the story that is being told. Maybe it is the author themselves if you're, like, listening to a memoir or something autobiographical, or obviously in this case it was a professor. Like, basically it was like you were listening to her lectures as if you were, like, sitting in her class. It does come with a PDF file that I didn't really look at that much, because I mostly listened to this when I was, like, baking in the kitchen, which I couldn't look at something while I was baking. So I listened to it on Audible, but I do think The Great Courses is available on other services and such. Okay, and then we have Clockwork Prince by Cassandra Clare that I honestly don't even remember very well. I didn't end up rating it because I meant to go through and sort of, like, reread and look at my annotations and write a review and rate it. And then that just never happened. This is part of a series anyway, and sort of, like, 2 series that intertwine into one, or, like, multiple series are involved in this series. So here, I'll just show you the back. So, like, those are the 6 books in the Mortal Instruments series, and then those are the other books that are a part of the trilogy that this book is a part of, which is called the Infernal Devices trilogy, and, like, they were published, they have a specific publishing order. So, like, this is the 2nd book in the trilogy, but it's the 6th book in the overall Shadowhunter Chronicles. I probably didn't need to explain that, but I did anyway. And the Shadowhunter Chronicles overall just has to do with these Shadowhunters, these people who are Shadowhunters, and they are, like, part angel and they kill demons and monsters and such. And then there are also, like, the Downworlder characters, and those are people who are, like, werewolves and vampires and other sort of supernatural creatures. I really don't remember what happened in this book. I do remember that it focused on Jem a little bit, who is my favorite. I love Jem. He's on the cover. That's supposed to be him. Jem. I love Jem. And oh my god, I'm like, oh my god, I'm making myself tear up just thinking about it. How dumb. I'm really afraid he's gonna die. I'm afraid he's gonna die in the 3rd book. Oh my god. I don't want him to die, okay? Oh my god, I, like, really made myself tear up. I did not mean to do that, but I can make myself cry easily. So now I'm gonna sound nasally. Great. Cool. And then we have another audiobook, Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. Another Anthony Horowitz book, who also wrote The Sentence's Death, the Detective Hawthorne series. So Magpie Murders I actually thought was a standalone, but turns out it's the first in a series. And the series is, I guess, just called the Susan Ryland series. They're just named after the main characters. This was narrated by Samantha Bond and Alan Cordonner. And I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. So the way that this is set up is kind of 2 parts. Susan Ryland, the main character, works at a publishing house, and she's an editor, and she receives the final draft for a book. I think it's the last book in a series by this really renowned author. Yeah, so she's reading the script, the draft. And so the first part, again, I don't actually know if it's half of the book, but the first part of the audiobook, and then of the book physically, if you have it, is the book that the author wrote. I think his name is Alan. So she's reading the draft, and then the story of what the book is the first part of the audio of the book, Magpie Murders. I'm sorry that this is getting convoluted. So you're listening to the book, and then the book stops, and it hasn't ended. And then Susan Ryland, the character, is like, "What the heck? Where are the final pages?" And so then she's trying to contact people, and then it turns out that the author has died. And so now there's there's the murder mystery of the book, what happens in the book that was written, and then the murder mystery of the author, which is a great premise. But it was kind of disappointing to me because I wanted more connection. I wanted more connection of the author's life to be in the book, and then more connections between the book and the murder. I mean, it was really good, but I didn't I didn't feel connected to the story, or particularly interested in anyone. There weren't any there aren't characters in this book that really stand out to me, except for the main character, because she's kind of the perspective that you're hearing the story from. I don't know. It was good. I'll probably continue on with the series, but I'm more interested in the Detective Hawthorne series than this one. Ooh, okay, and now we have another favorite, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. And so I'm not going to talk a lot about this in this video, but I do go into quite a lot of detail in one of my past videos. I think the thumbnail just says books and adaptations, but then I titled it talking about books and their adaptations for an hour because I was talking about Anna Karenina and the 2012 adaptation of that, and The Haunting of Hill House and the various adaptations of it, and Brideshead Revisited and the 1981 miniseries of that, and We Have Always Lived in the Castle and the 2018 film adaptation of that. So if you're interested in any of those, I have a video talking about those books and those adaptations. So you can hear thoughts about The Haunting of Hill House in that video, but I will go into probably a lot of the same information in my favorites one that I haven't filmed yet. But I will tell you that The Haunting of Hill House is about Eleanor Vance, who is invited to Hill House by Dr. Montague, who wants to investigate paranormal activities and hauntings, essentially. And he also invites Theodora, who is sort of psychic. She has these sort of abilities. When she touches things, she can infer feelings or something. I forget her exact ability, but it has to do with touching things, so she has gloves. And then also Luke is there with them, who is set to inherit the house when his older relatives die. So they are at Hill House and they experience hauntings, and it's considered a horror novel, but I find it more scary to think about than really when you're reading it being scared. Afterwards I'm oh, that's creepy. Or if you just kind of picture yourself in that situation. I don't know, maybe it's just because I don't get freaked out over books that much. I've never been scared by a book, so maybe that just has to do with it. But it's so good. I'll talk about it more later. Right. We Have Always Lived in the Castle, also by Shirley Jackson. So, oh, by the way, The Haunting of Hill House, I rated it 4 out of 5 stars, but I think really a more accurate rating would be 4.5 out of 5. And then We Have Always Lived in the Castle is also a 4.5, but like maybe closer to like a 3.75 if I was being more specific. And this was a reread for me. This is about Mary Cat Blackwood, who lives with her older sister Constance and their uncle Julian, and they live in this big mansion in this town. These both take place, I guess I haven't really been telling you when things have taken place, but these were written in like the 50s. So that's when they take place as well. I feel like that's important to the stories, at least a little. And they live in this mansion in this town where the townspeople hate them, and they also hate the townspeople. And they're kind of peculiar. Constance is very like happy all the time, but like you can tell that she's kind of putting on this facade in a way. You can tell that she's like dealing with things, but on the exterior she's happy and like just cooking and baking and things like that, and cleaning the house, and she has this very like maternal role. And then Mary Cat is like kind of a witch. she's pretty much a witch, and like not like super witchy, but like has these rituals that she does that she thinks casts spells just by like saying words 3 times, or like having 3 words that are sort of sacred, that like it's a sign if someone says them, kind of thing. Or she'll put up certain, like she hammers like a notebook into a tree, and like that's supposed to be like a relic that casts protection on them. And it's one day she finds it on the ground actually, and she's like, oh no, this is a sign, this is bad. And it is because their cousin Charles has come to visit, and he pretty much just wants all their money. So he starts to cause some trouble, and events ensue. And I do really like this, but I feel like, I don't know, there's just something about it that I don't love as much as The Haunting of Hill House. That was kind of already like that even before I had read The Haunting of Hill House. Like, I think it's a really interesting story. It's something that I like to talk about more than really like reading it, if that makes sense. But meanwhile, the difference sort of between these two, like why this one is more a favorite and this one isn't, is because I did really enjoy reading this, and it has a lot of subtext, and I like talking about it, but this one is kind of more so I just like talking about it. And then another favorite is Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, which I mentioned is in that Books and Adaptations video that I have, which I'll again link in the card and in the description. And this I initially rated a 3 out of 5 stars, but I've thought about this book so much that it's a 4 out of 5. Why the rating change? That mostly came about because I kept thinking about it, and then also I was realizing that that rating of 3 out of 5 kind of came from me having certain expectations for it, and it involving things that I felt like I wasn't as interested in when I was reading it, but like, again, sort of in hindsight, it's just so good. It's so good. It was a little slow. It like felt like it was taking forever to read, which is why I didn't end up giving it like a full 5 out of 5 stars. There's just so much to this. Brideshead Revisited, though, oh my god. Okay, first I'll get into what it's about, but it's about Charles Ryder, who like, oh wait, I keep forgetting this, but there is like a subtitle of it. Brideshead Revisited, The Sacred and Profane Memories of Captain Charles Ryder. And I feel like why is that full title not on the cover? It is split up into 3 parts, and it's basically Charles's memories of the Flight family. And Sebastian is like this friend that is somebody that he befriends at college, at university in the first part. And the first part is like really about him, like Charles and Sebastian. And then you get into the second part, and it's kind of more about Sebastian's family, and Sebastian starts to like sort of fade away as a character, and this part has a lot to do with Sebastian's mom. And then Julia, Sebastian's sister, becomes more of a prominent character, who is kind of the focus in part 3, in terms of Charles's relationship. That's sort of like this evolution that happens throughout the novel, but it's so much more. There's a lot of like discussion about religion, even though like it's not preachy at all. It's just like religion is really a part of Sebastian's mom's life, Lady Marshman, and she tries to like push Sebastian into oh my god, I can't talk about it. Like I can't get into it, or else I will be talking about this forever. But recently, it was like in November maybe, it was announced that Luca Guadagnino is working on a miniseries adaptation for this, which sounds very exciting and I'm like very intrigued by. But also like the 1981 miniseries is so faithful. It's literally like the best adaptation I've ever seen. Like it is the book. So like what is he gonna do? I'm very intrigued. Worried. Like I'm like, I don't know. Is it gonna be as good as the other miniseries? But we'll see. And like some casting was announced and things like that. But like I guess maybe it'll be filmed this year probably, won't it? Okay. I'll leave details of that maybe in the description if I remember. And then I read Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I mostly read this because I wanted to watch Cabaret, and this is the inspiration for Cabaret. This is set up sort of like a journal in a way, like a notebook. It is vignettes from Christopher Isherwood's life. I'm assuming real. I'm not sure how much of this is like fictionalized and how much is accurate to like actual events that happened in Christopher Isherwood's life, but he's in Berlin in the 30s, and it's just about people he meets and things that they do, basically. Like it's kind of a lack of plot and more of, I wouldn't necessarily say a character study, but just slice of life kind of narrative here. And because it takes place in Berlin in the 30s, as you get further into the book, there's this kind of like looming presence of Nazis and Hitler's rule coming more to the forefront, basically, and becoming more prominent, not only in the narrative, but also like in their lives as well. And then Christopher goes back to Christopher. We're on a first name basis here. Christopher goes back to, is he American or is he British? But he's no longer abroad. He leaves Berlin. Goodbye to Berlin. I mean, I liked it, but I don't know. I didn't get a lot from it, and I don't know how to talk about it either. But Cabaret was great, by the way. I did really like Cabaret, and even though it is a very like, it just sort of takes the characters and kind of merges it all together into like one story, but very much focuses on Sally Bowles. You know, I just can't be. This is as concise as I can be, and it's been 46 minutes, so I don't know how much I'm really going to be able to cut out. Just being honest here. The next book I have is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by, I guess it is Ian Reid. I kept saying Ian because of the way that it's spelled. I don't know why. My mind was just like, that's definitely Ian and not Ian. I guess it's Ian. I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Like it had elements that were there and that I liked, but the execution and the ending upset me. I don't want to go into spoilers for this, especially because I do think it's something that is probably best to go into, like, not knowing too much, except for trigger warnings. Just, it does deal with mental health. Not a very good representation. It's kind of like one of those situations where you're like, again? This is what we're doing here? So, not only was it disappointing that that's the route it took, but also, I just, like, had this crazy theory. So I'll get into the plot of the book and then tell you what my theories were. It's about this main character, this woman who is in the car with her boyfriend, and they're on the way to meet his parents. She's going to meet them for the first time. They haven't even been dating for that long, and on the way there she is thinking of ending things, and they're having conversations, and she's like thinking back to the past and like reminiscing on certain memories. So it is like from her perspective. And there's also this thing, she keeps getting calls from this like weird person, but like it says it's her number when she is looking at the phone, but then like the phone calls don't make sense. It's this sort of psychological thriller horror. I would say the book has more horror in it than it was made into a film adaptation, and the film isn't as horror as this is, I would say. I guess that's all I can really tell you about it. But my theories. There's this part where she's at the parents' house, and the basement's like off limits. Like, don't go in the basement. So of course she goes into the basement. She says that she has to go to the bathroom, and then I don't remember if she goes to the bathroom first or goes downstairs first. But in any case, she goes both in the bathroom and downstairs. One after the other. And then when she's in the basement, she like sees these paintings, and they're just like, I don't know, like it kind of looks like someone's been being held down there, possibly, or like, I don't know. And then it was kind of ominous, like she was being watched or something, and I was just like, oh my god, she's gonna be caught, like this was high stress moment, okay? And like so suspenseful when I was reading it, and I was thinking like, oh my god, her boyfriend is like is like part of this like maybe like conspiracy and like science experiment, like a crazy experiment. And like maybe she's a part of it, and she better get out of there, and like maybe she's being watched right now, maybe the boyfriend's parents are gonna like find her there. Like I don't know, I had this theory that there was a conspiracy theory going on, or like maybe a science experiment, an experiment. And maybe she was a part of the experiment, and like maybe her boyfriend wasn't really her boyfriend, but like he was in on it the whole time. Like, but that's not what happened, by the way. But that's where my mind went, and I like wanted it to go in that direction, and it didn't. And then on top of not going in that direction, it was just like bad mental health representation, and I was like, oh no. So that ending is very hit or miss. Like it's fine if you like it and think it's a good ending. I just like didn't really like the ending, and on top of that, I didn't like the mental health representation. Like I still think you can like something and enjoy something, and then recognize that like, oh, that could have been done better though in terms of representation. Just to clarify there. All right, Daisy Miller by Henry James. So this is a bind-up of Daisy Miller and The Turn of the Screw, which I've already previously read. So I just wanted to read Daisy Miller and finally have this like whole book like checked off the list, so to speak. So I read Daisy Miller. I also listened to it. I read it along with listening to an audiobook that was on YouTube, so I'll link that in the description. And I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. I just didn't care. It was basically about Daisy Miller, this like American socialite. I think she's American. This socialite that the main character is like really infatuated with, and I couldn't really tell why, other than like she's not like the other girls. Like she's kind of rebellious, and like she is a socialite, but at the same time she's ostracized by society because of the way she acts, and like she's very frivolous and just like kind of frivolous but rebellious at the same time. I don't know, I just didn't care. So 2 out of 5. I am really curious to see how I would feel about Henry James's large novels like the Ambassadors and Washington Square, because I have a feeling they'll kind of like deal with that same sort of premise, but in a lot more detail and with more like substance for plot, and more depth and stuff. So curious to see what I'll think of Henry James's longer works, because I've only ever read short stories and novellas from him. And also, by the way, The Turn of the Screw I only gave a 2 out of 5 stars also when I read it, but I'm going to talk about that, probably mention it a little bit more later towards the end of the video, whenever that may be, because it's been 53 minutes. Oh my gosh. I'm doing a good job though. This is definitely the one that I'm using. And then we have Fingersmith. Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. This was my favorite book that I read in 2020. Did I talk about this? I swear I probably did mention it in at least one video, but I'm not going to get into it in this one because it was my favorite. So, you can tell when I really like something sometimes, or when I'm thinking, because I'll put the object up to my face like this. Also, the premise is like, the premise has a lot of details. What I say? The premise has a lot of details, and I don't even want to begin explaining it right now. I guess I'll just say that, like, if you're familiar with The Handmaiden, the South Korean film from 2015 or 2016, one of those years, this is the source material for The Handmaiden. So that gives you an idea of, like, what the plot is like. Oh, Dickensian lesbians. Enough said. Right? That's just my pitch for Fingersmith, is Dickensian lesbians, because it's historical fiction and they're lesbians. And then I listened to the audiobook for Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which has a full cast, including Jennifer Beals. Speaking of lesbian, I just kept picturing Bet when I heard Jennifer Beals narrate as Daisy. But eventually I got used to it, and I was like, all right, Daisy, this character. Yes, Jennifer Beals, Benjamin Bratt, Judy Greer, Robin Lee, Pablo Schreiber, Fred Berman, Ari Fliakos? Sorry, Ari. January Lavoie, Julia Whelan, Jonathan Davis, and more, but I could not fit them all on this page. It was a long list of narrators. Each narrator is basically assigned a character. The story is told in like interview format, so it just works really well for the audiobook experience, and that kind of like that framing and that narrative device works really well for an audiobook, which is why I listen to it. I don't have this book physically. I would like to get it though. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and it's about this band called Daisy Jones and the Six, and their rise to fame and subsequent fall, and all the chaos basically involved in that, and all the relationships, and the rock and roll, and the drugs, and the alcohol, and the sex, and the fandomness in a way, just like fans and becoming famous, and all the facets of that. And I did really like it. I just felt like sort of a disconnect because I wanted to be able to connect to the characters outside of the book itself, but I couldn't do that because they're not a real band. So it's not like there aren't real songs that I can listen to understand more what they're talking about, and to hear the songs that they're talking about writing, and that they're talking about like the influence of how that song, like where the lyrics are coming from, in terms of what's happening in their lives and how they're feeling and how that is made into the music, which leads me to I can't wait for the adaptation of this. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a series on Amazon, and I just like can't wait for there to be like real music to listen to, and just sort of like real people to sort of assign to these characters. I just feel like they'll be a bit more fleshed out because they are just like fake characters being interviewed, as well as something that I mean, this is just a flaw of that sort of narrative style in terms of certain literary devices. So there's like a lot of foreshadowing at certain parts, but because of the way it's told with the interview style format, like things have to be mentioned instead of it being like part of the description, you know, as if it would be part of a description if you were reading it regularly written. and it's something that I'm looking forward to also in the adaptation, because there are things like that can be put in the frame but not the focus. So like one of the characters becomes an alcoholic, and so instead of them being like, oh yeah, he started drinking too much, and like saying that sort of thing, you can show him like behind the character that you're focusing on in that shot. And he's, you know, doing he becomes alcoholic and addicted to cocaine. So, like, you can see him in the background, like, doing drugs and alcohol, and, like, that sort of being an image that's there, but not the focus of the scene, you know what I mean? And I like that instead of something that's like, and I started drinking a lot more, like, something that's more, I guess, straightforward. I guess I don't like it when things are straightforward like that in my books. Not sure where I was going with that at the very end, but I have so many more to get to. Then we have The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which originally I listened to an audiobook, but I now have a copy physically, so I will show you it. I gave this is by Robert Louis Stevenson. This also has like other stories in it, but I only read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The audiobook that I listened to is narrated. I didn't write down the narrator. Okay, well, I don't know who the narrator is. It'll be in the description. All this information will be in the description anyway, but I thought I would say it in the video as well. So I'm not going to say a lot about this in case someone doesn't actually know like what happens in it, which I feel like is something that's just so unfortunate that it's become like part of pop culture, just what happens what this story is. Sort of like everyone knows Dracula is a vampire. Like, I'm pretty sure I don't have to be wary about someone not knowing Dracula is a vampire. But this is one that there probably are people out there that don't know. So I'm not going to say exactly what happens, but no, I'm not even going to talk about it at all in terms of plot, I don't think. I'm just going to tell you what I thought about it. So I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I really liked it, but I wanted more from it. And it made me, I don't know, it made me feel at home because of the narrative style of there being, like, Dr. Jekyll is not a narrator until, like, much further into the story. So you don't get his perspective. It's from these, like, sort of outsiders. And then it sort of trickles down in the same sort of way that, like, Frankenstein is written, where it's, like, letters within letters, or, like, is it letters or journals? But, like, sort of layered, a narrative style. I really like that, and it also just reminded me a lot of other Victorian works that I read. Like, it reminded me of The Picture of Dorian Gray a lot, just had that similar feel, and The Picture of Dorian Gray is one of the first classics that I read on my own, so it was just really nice, but I wanted more from it. It was so short, and I would have liked to go into, like, more detail, and it was really good, but I also wanted more, and I was kind of disappointed because I already knew what happened. That's what I'll go with, I guess. Okay, and then I read The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock, and this, I listened to it on audiobook. It was narrated by Mark Bromhall. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Alright, editing me is back to do a better job with The Devil All the Time. So, first of all, there are just, like, so many things I forgot to mention that are important for this book. The Devil All the Time follows a big cast of characters, and it mostly has to do with how evil or sin or vices or the devil's work, so to speak, is a part of their lives or becomes a part of their life. It mostly focuses on Arwen, who starts off as a young boy in the beginning of the book, and then you sort of see him grow up. And there are other characters like his father and a priest and other people in the town. I think there are, like, 2 main towns that it takes place in, and there's, like, a sheriff, and there's just, like, a lot of characters that are connected in different ways, and I really like that. I thought that was interesting. So that was definitely, like, a plus for the book. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars because, as terrible as it sounds, I feel like I was kind of indifferent to a lot of things in the beginning, and just, I wasn't particularly attached to anybody. I was just sort of experiencing the story, or, like, listening to the story, until about 70% of the way through the audiobook, and Lenora got me. There were sections that were, like, really focusing on her, and I was attached, and I was crying so much because of things that she goes through. So that brings me to just a lot of trigger warnings for the book, and probably the movie as well. There's a lot of blood and gore. There's sexual assault, there's grooming, there's pedophilia, there's homophobia, there's suicide, there's a lot of things, animal sacrifice, just so much that happens, which is why I say that, like, it's kind of terrible that I felt indifferent to a lot of the things that were happening. I feel like I was just taking in the story, and I wasn't necessarily putting any sort of judgment on the characters. I mean, even if I thought a character was bad, I was still just listening to the story to see where it went and what happened with their character. I wasn't really doing much more thinking, I guess. I feel like it's kind of hard to explain because I thought it has a lot of elements that I like, and I thought it was well done, but again, it's not necessarily something that you're gonna probably come back to a lot, and it's a hard story overall to I was gonna say digest, but I didn't like that word, so then I just paused. I feel like I'm in this weird spot because I would recommend it if it seems like the kind of thing that you would be interested in hearing and, like, reading the story, but at the same time there's, like, so much to it, and I feel like it's important, but also I didn't necessarily connect with it in any sort of ways. I don't know, I feel like I'm trying to explain why I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, and I don't know, maybe that was just a fault of listening to the audiobook. Not that it was bad listening to the audiobook, but perhaps I would have more feelings towards it if I had read it physically, is what I'm saying. And then we have The Lodger, A Tale of the London Fog by Marie Belloc Londes, or Londes, I'm not exactly sure. And I listened to this on audiobook, narrated by Lorna Raver. And I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. This is also just something that was like, okay, I experienced it, I listened to it, and then I moved on. But it was also kind of confusing because I did also watch the Alfred Hitchcock adaptation before I listened to it. So there are images from the book, or there are images from the film that I keep picturing, but then like the narration of the book also is like in my head at the same time, and I feel like it wasn't an accurate adaptation, which is fine, but it's confusing me. Basically, The Lodger is inspired by Jack the Ripper and this story that the author had heard of this couple thinking that Jack the Ripper was a lodger at their place, at their lodgings. Then the author was inspired by this and wrote this story of this older couple getting this lodger, and then each of them think like individually. It's funny because they don't even interact that much. It seems like it's mostly from the perspective of the wife, and then every once in a while it'll like cut to the author, or what, it'll cut to the husband, and that the husband will be thinking like the same things that she is, but they haven't talked to each other about it, so they both come to this conclusion that the lodger is this Jack the Ripper character. He's not actually named Jack the Ripper in the book, but he's based on Jack the Ripper. So they think that he's this serial murderer. But then it's kind of weird because I swear they're like protecting him. They like don't want him to be caught. And I don't understand why. Especially because they have a daughter. And then I'm like, wait, what's happening with the daughter? Like, it's all very like muddled in my head. So I know I'm not doing a great job of explaining this, but it's probably best that I don't go into more detail, because then like then maybe you would like to read it or at least watch the movie. I don't remember what happens in either, really. Again, it's just all mixed together, and it's like, if you think he's the murderer, I swear, like another character is like a police officer, and they like won't tell him. They won't tell the police officer anything. Like that there's possibly a murderer in their house. I don't get it. Okay. And they have a daughter again. Okay, and then I reread Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I had been meaning to reread this for like a couple of years now, I think. And I finally did it because the new adaptation was going to hit Netflix, and I was like, all right, I'm going to read it before the new adaptation is on Netflix. And if you're curious, my thoughts on the Netflix film, link to my Letterboxd review will be in the description. It's really long, lots of thoughts, which is why I'm just saying link in the description. Rebecca, the book, though, it has to do with this, God, I feel like I've explained this so many times. I've mentioned Rebecca quite a bit, I think. So, Rebecca is about this unnamed narrator, and she meets and marries Maxim de Winter and becomes the new Mrs. Maxim de Winter. She doesn't have a name, so she's just her identity. She relies on other people for her identity. First, she's this companion to Mrs. Van Hopper, I think. So she's known as the companion, and then she marries Maxim, and now she's known as Mrs. Maxim de Winter. And it's just like, all right, I mean, I get it. Like, it's very well done by Daphne du Maurier, but, like, she depends on other people for her identity. She marries Maxim, and she moves to Manderley, which is the estate that he owns, that is his estate, and then she hears of Rebecca, who is his first wife who died, and Rebecca sort of haunts Manderley and haunts Maxim and the main character. Not really. She's not really a ghost. I think there were some people who were reading this because of the interest in the new adaptation and thought that Rebecca was actually like a ghost. Like, she's present. She is a presence in the book, but she's not a ghost. It's not a real haunting. So just being clear about that. And the main character wants to like live up to who Rebecca was and be that sort of wife for Maxim, and just like live up to who Rebecca was for Maxim and what she did for Manderley. And there's also Mrs. Danvers, who is this, she's the housekeeper, and she was like in love with Rebecca pretty much. And so she kind of like tortures this main character because she's like, you can't replace Rebecca, no one can replace her, sort of thing. And yeah, there's a reveal. Again, spoiler free here. There's a reveal I don't know if it's halfway through the book, but it's basically like before the reveal and after the reveal. And like rereading this, the before part was just like, main character, you are so frustrating. Like, it's so hard to read from like her perspective and just like know where it's going. And she's like thinking all the things, and you're just like, no, you're wrong. Just stop right now. Just be you. It's fine. But then like afterwards, it's like really interesting to see her sort of change once she's heard this information. But then also just like the roller coaster ride that is the, I guess, second part, I'll call it, of the book, because you're finding out all this information, and just like literally you can read the rest of it so quickly. And that's exactly what I did, because it's just like reveal after reveal and more information and like twists and turns, again, a roller coaster and fast paced. And it's just so good. I love that part. I'm not putting it in my favorites video because the experience of rereading it wasn't favorite, basically, but it is still one of my favorite books. It was like 5 out of 5 stars the first time I read it. Instant favorite. And it's still a favorite, but like, I don't know, just, it was kind of weird upon this reread because I wanted to get the details like in my mind, because I feel like watching the Hitchcock adaptation too many times has kind of like, I forgot the details of what happens in the book compared to that adaptation, because of the Hays Code, things had to be changed. I have the details in my head now, but like still, the reread was like kind of disappointing. It just like wasn't as crazy as the first time, which is like, I expected that, but still a favorite book, but the experience of rereading it wasn't a standout for 2020. Hello everyone, editing me here, or well, technically I'm not editing right now, but I just watched a video of somebody's like best books of 2020 that they read, their video, and they mentioned Rebecca, and I realized there was something I forgot to say about Rebecca that I feel like I should, and if I haven't yet, this is like kind of spoilery for Rebecca, but I was just like, I was watching the video and the girl was like, and there's a lot of discussion about like whether or not Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca were a thing, were like together. And I had totally forgot. I was like, oh yeah, because like it was kind of what a lot of people were talking about like around the time that the new film adaptation came out on Netflix. And then I was like giving my thoughts. I told her in a comment, and I am now telling you these thoughts as well. So personally, I think that Mrs. Danvers was in love with Rebecca, but I feel like Mrs. Danvers was another person that Rebecca was manipulating. That's my personal thoughts, but that's also like taking into account and believing what Maxim says about Rebecca, because really all we know about Rebecca is what other people say about her, which is mostly Maxim, who is biased because obviously like he was in love with her, and then obviously something happened to like ruin their relationship, and then he ended up hating her. And then the other information we get about Rebecca is mostly Mrs. Danvers and Jack, who were also in love with Rebecca, so like they're also biased. And I just think it's really interesting that both of the like, well, okay, except for Mrs. Danvers, but the other two sort of like female characters, and both characters who are known as Mrs. Maxim de Winter, are like characters that rely on other people for their identity, which is something I'm pretty sure I mentioned in the video that I recorded, how the main character, she's unnamed, and so like she relies on other people for who she is. You know, first she's known as this companion to Mrs. Van Hopper, then she is Mrs. Maxim de Winter, and Rebecca is kind of the same way, because all we know about her identity is from what we get from other people. amazing. I just think it's so interesting. I think that's all I wanted to mention. But I was like thinking about Rebecca again because I did have like so many more, not necessarily so many more thoughts with rereading this, but it was just a lot of other things that I hadn't really recognized the first time and didn't think about the first time reading it, which was also like a decade ago, so that's understandable. Oh my god, I swear we're almost done. Then I listened to the audiobook for The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. This was narrated by Anthony Held, not to be confused with Anthony Head, who plays Giles in Buffy and Uther in Merlin. Because I saw that name and I was like, I know that person. But no, wrong. No, that's Anthony Head. This is Anthony Held. And honestly, I don't even remember the narration, so I can't really comment on that. And I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. Anyway, it was really disappointing. Like, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, who knew that, like, the Headless Horseman is, like, not even in it? It's mostly about, like, Ichabod Crane, who's a weirdo. He's a weirdo. I mean, like, so, mostly with Sleepy Hollow, I'm familiar with, the Tim Burton film, and, like, Ichabod Crane in that, you know, Johnny Depp's character, he's, like, quirky weird, but, like, this Ichabod Crane is like, the way that he's, like, describing, like, women and, like, food, it's very strange. I guess that's sometimes expected for older works, but still. There's other characters, but, like, it's really just, like, Ichabod Crane moves to Sleepy Hollow, and he's this teacher who, like, sometimes beats the children, and, you know, because discipline for the children, apparently, and, he loves Katrina something, I forget her last name, and that's like a really prominent family in Sleepy Hollow, and there's this legend of this guy who, like, his head got hit by one of those things that shoots out the cannon, the ball that comes out the cannon, right? And then he's the Headless Horseman, and then Ichabod Crane gets into a fight with, like, this other guy who's pursuing Katrina, and, like, then Ichabod Crane disappears, and, like, was it the Headless Horseman, or was it the guy, like, playing a prank on him, pretending to be the Headless Horseman? And, like, that was it. Like, it wasn't, like, that sounded more exciting than it actually was. I did like the description. Like, I liked the writing of it, but, like, the story was so disappointing. And Ichabod Crane is weird. Also, like, where was the Headless Horseman? Like, not even in it, so disappointing. But the writing was good, so that's a plus. And then we have The Queen of the Damned by Anne Rice, the third book in the Vampire Chronicles, which I already mentioned is one of my favorites, so I'll talk about it in my favorites video. Did I mention? I talked about Simon Vance as narrator, right? I'm pretty sure. Great job. Also, the book, 5 out of 5. And then lastly, 2 short stories, The Jolly Corner and The Romance of Certain Old Clothes, both by Henry James. So this is where I thought I would mention The Turn of the Screw again, because I was reading these 2 short stories because they're incorporated in the Haunting of Bly Manor series on Netflix. The main, like, story of that as an adaptation, not sure about that wording there, but is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. So that's, like, the main story that's incorporated into the narrative. But actually I learned that every episode is named after a short story by Henry James, but I didn't know that. I thought that, like, mostly it was just The Turn of the Screw, The Jolly Corner, and The Romance of Certain Old Clothes, which it really is. Like, those are the 3 that are mainly within the narrative, and other ones just sort of, like, different themes or, like, characters sort of are inspired by people in the other stories that are by Henry James that the episodes are named after, and, like, specifically they're all, like, ghost stories for the most part. I didn't know that before I watched the show, but that's okay, because I'm fine with just reading The Jolly Corner and The Romance of Certain Old Clothes. And The Jolly Corner, I gave a 2 out of 5 stars. So that is a third story by Henry James that I gave a 2 out of 5 stars. For both of these, I read them online, so I will link those websites in the description, and then I also listened to the audiobooks as I was reading them online. So I will also link those audiobooks in the description because they were just on YouTube. And the narrator for The Jolly Corner was Nicholas Clifford, and the narrator for The Romance of Certain Old Clothes was Chiquito Crasto. So just giving some credit to the narrators there. So the Jolly Corner, though, this one is about this old gentleman who returns home from living abroad for like 30 years. I can't remember if he's American or if he lived in America for 30 years. Oh my god. Sorry, that just like made me think of this video from NCT, who's a K-pop group. Just like...
Alright guys, what's up? We're the foreign swaggers, so
yeah, Johnny's gonna freestyle.
I lived in America for 4 years. That's why I'm here, man.
It's kind of like a fan joke. Oh my god, that was really funny. Okay, like as I was saying that clip was playing in my head. So, or if you lived in America for 4 years. All right. I don't remember if he's American or if he lived in America, but he has returned home from being abroad for 30 years, and he's like looking at the properties that he owns. He starts thinking about who he would be had he not gone away and lived in a different country for 30 years. This thought of him, this sort of alter ego persona that he thinks about, he sort of starts visualizing and seeing as he is, I don't know, like literally he's just looking at property, right? Like that's what's happening. And then he's just picturing this guy, and this guy's like, he's really scared of this guy who's not really there, but like, is he there? So that's the Jolly Corner, and I just like didn't care. I don't think I like doppelganger stories, because it reminded me of The Double, which I also didn't like. So, I don't know. It was fine. It was whatever. I would not read it again. And then The Romance of Sword and Old Clothes. Twist here, 4 out of 5 stars. It was so good. And it was shorter than The Jolly Corner, and it was so good. I can't really, like, first of all, I forgot all the characters' names. So it's gonna be a little weird to explain. I kind of want to tell you the ending, but, like, it's so short. I won't tell you the ending. I'll let you know if I do end up spoiling it. But this, 4 out of 5 stars. It's about, it kind of like trickles down. It like starts off talking about this like guy who's the father of the main family in the story, and then it talks about the wife for a little bit, the mom, and then it talks about the older son for a bit, and then it talks about his friend that he makes when he's away at college, and then the friend and the brother are visiting his family, and then it goes into his 2 younger sisters that you learn about, and both of the sisters have their eye on the friend, that they want to marry him. Then like that's as much as I can say about the plot without spoiling it. But like the last couple paragraphs, so suspenseful. I was like, oh my god. Like I knew what was gonna happen, but then like I didn't know at the same time. And it was just really good, and like the suspense was so high, and I don't know, I think I was just like a lot more into these characters and liked the setup of like learning about the family a bit, even though like it was so short, it wasn't even that detailed. So maybe because it was so short and like packed a punch, I was like, yes, this was so good. And then also again, it had that suspense that I feel like ghost stories usually should have to some extent, that I just didn't really get in any of the previous stories that I've read by Henry James. Oh, Daisy Miller is not a ghost story, but, you know, The Turn of the Screw and the Jolly Corner are also ghost stories. So, yes, there is a ghost involved in The Romance of Certain Old Clothes in some way, and just, yeah, it was so good. I'm glad that I liked it too. I mean, it is really short, so it's not like it really would have been a waste of time if I didn't enjoy it, but I am glad that there is a story by Henry James that I like, because then that gives me more hope for other stories of his, and again, like I said before, the longer novels by him. And also, I'm kind of thinking about rereading The Turn of the Screw. It's like not really high on my list, but I rewatched The Innocents, which is an adaptation of The Turn of the Screw, last month, and it was so good. I was like, how is this not one of my favorite movies? And I could just see myself watching it more often now. Link to my Letterboxd review for that if you want to read it. It's pretty short. That'll be in the description. So, yeah, I rewatched The Innocents, and then I was like, do I want to reread The Turn of the Screw? Because especially after watching The Haunting of Bly Manor, I was like thinking about it again, and I was like, yeah, anyway, it's been on my mind. But that's it. Those are the 30 books that I read in 2020. High hopes for a great reading year for 2021. It's fine if I don't reach 52 books, which if you didn't watch my previous video, it was my movie and reading goals basically for 2021. So I will also link that in the card and in the description. It's been an hour and 24 minutes, but this is definitely the video. This is the best one. So that's exciting because I don't have to refilm it and I don't have to try to chop together the other videos that just aren't good. So I would love to know what you think of any of these books. Of course, I will be talking about the other books that are like top favorites for the year in a separate video. I'd love to know what you read in 2020. How did your reading year go? It was very mixed on BookTube. A lot of people did less reading than usual with everything going on in 2020, and then there were some people that read so much more, you know, with more free time and being at home. So I'd love to know how your reading year went, especially in comparison to other years. Thank you again. Thank you so much for watching, and look forward to the favorite books of 2020 video. I'm not exactly sure when that will be, but it will be coming. So look forward to that and other upcoming videos. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye.